Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Glenn Sevilla Mas, a board member of Philippine Pen, and I will be your host this afternoon. Welcome to this tribute to National Artist for Literature and Philippine Pen founder, Frankie Sionil Jose. It is Valentine's Day, and today also happens to be the 40th day since the passing of Manong Frankie on January 6, 2022. To commemorate his life and work, as well as a final send-off and farewell, the Cultural Center of the Philippines and Philippine Pen have gathered his colleagues, friends, and admirers to pay tribute to the writer and the man. And who better to start this tribute than the chairperson of the CCP Board of Trustees, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Margie Moran Floirendo.
A globally recognized writer and advocate for the empowerment of Asian literary communities, national artist F. Sionil Jose was the first one to push for Asia as a powerhouse in literature. He not only wrote brilliant novels and stories, he also worked hard to produce and promote publications that united the literary writers of Asia. That was one of the many reasons he was conferred the National Artist for Literature Award in 2001. His strong advocacy to espouse national sovereignty and social justice, as evident in his works, was another reason he was revered. When he passed away last month, the Philippines lost a literary gem. As the chair of the Cultural Center of the Philippines, I was fortunate enough to be with him on several occasions at the center, as he attended important arts and culture events as national artist. His mere presence was already an inspiration to us. To those who are passionate about the arts and literature, on behalf of the CCP community, I wish to acknowledge the people who will give their messages of sympathy today. Thank you to the international roster of writers and friends, acclaimed US author James Fallows, and Singapore's poet laureate Edwin Thamboo. I look forward to hear what you will share later to honor the man whose novels, stories, and essays help define the Filipino to readers and make Filipino writing known to the world. Salute to the National Artist for Literature, Artist F. Sionil Jose. You will be so missed.
Let us now listen to the message of the President of the Cultural Center of the Philippines and the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, Mr. Arsenio Nick Lizaso.
The passing of F. Sionil Jose is an enormous loss to his friends and family, his extended family, including the Philippine Center for International PEN and its mother organization, the PEN International, a worldwide association of writers founded in London in 1921. He will always be remembered as the Filipino writer who forged new ground for writers in the Philippines and Asia. I wish to thank the writers and government officials who are part of this tribute and for devoting their time and effort to commemorate the life and works of Frankie. Thank you, Pen Chair and Premier Novelist Charlson Ong, retired Justice Antonio Carpio, former Ombudsman Justice Conchita Carpio Morales, poet Ricardo de Ungria, fictionist Jose Butch Dalisay, lawyer historian Saul Hovilenia, and several others. Despite the grief and pain, I hope that the family and friends of F. Sionil Jose can see that his presence and insights have not ended with his passing, but that instead his spirits will live on to the reading of his works through the sharing and publication of his stories. I am honored to share with you today. We are doing this because we will launch the newest books of our beloved national artist for literature, the ever-productive F. Sionil. We will be the first ones to launch these books virtually, entitled Collected Stories, Collected Essays, and Promdi, an Autobiography. Salamat po at hanggang sa muli, F. Sionil Jose.
And now, here is the Vice President and Artistic Director of the Cultural Center of the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chris Miliado.
I am Chris Miliado, Artistic Director of the Cultural Center of the Philippines and Theater Director of stage adaptations of F. Sionil Jose's novels. I would like to thank our co-organizers, the Philippine PEN officers and members, especially Mr. Charleston Ong, Lito Solueta, and Sarge Lacuesta. Please be assured that CCP will continue to support the Philippine Center of the International PEN. The CCP has been hosting the Philippine PEN Conference and events for many years upon the initiative of Manong Frankie. Manong Frankie was always ready to inspire the next generation of writers, readers, literature teachers with his impromptu, straightforward, and oftentimes controversial pronouncements. My first meeting with Manong Frankie many years back was far from amiable. We were into the technical week of the stage adaptation of his novel Tree at the Raha Sulaiman Theater in Intramuros, which we billed Balete, when we received word that he was putting a stop to the production. For some reason, there was a miscommunication regarding the use of his work. Then the actors had rehearsed for more than a month, the sets and costumes were ready, tickets had been pre-sold. Cancellation would be devastating for the Philippine Educational Theater Association, who produced the show. We asked his close friend, Bienvenido Lumbera, a national artist for literature, to intercede for us. Bien suggested we go with him to La Solidaridad bookstore to meet with Manong Frankie face to face. I remember sitting in his office, terrified, together with playwright Rodi Vera, as we took in all the admonitions, then a lecture on Philippine history, then pointers from his favorite musical, Man of La Mancha. Bien whispered that we should take those as signs that he was warming up to the production. When we invited him to the previews, Manong Frankie turned us down. On the night of the final dress technical rehearsal, to our surprise, Manong Frankie sauntered into the Raha Sulaiman Open Air Theater with his black beret and walking cane. He was accompanied by Manang Tesi. The first thing he noticed was the set design. The production took liberty in interpreting his central metaphor of the tree and turned it upside down. The leaves stretched out to the stage floor and the roots were up in the air. He reached out with his cane from across the aisle and tapped my chair. Ano yan? What is that? So I explained. He didn't say anything, and he stayed quiet all throughout the run. At the end of the preview, he gave a comment on how we should make the landlord more threatening and imposing. After that, we invited him again to grace opening night. Still, he refused. On opening night, a few minutes before curtain, Manong Frankie showed up with copies of his books and stayed until after curtain call to sign copies for audiences. He gifted Rodi, the lead actor Nanding Josef, and me the complete set of the Rosales cycle of novels. A few years later, we adapted his novels Mass. Then The Pretenders followed. And then the short story that he said was the epilogue, entitled Dong Ao. Manong Frankie showed up in all of the productions and even stayed up for the cast parties. After one of the shows, Manang Tesi came up to me and asked, Iho, Ba't ang daming sex scenes? I told her, Manang, you should ask the novelist. We still need to fulfill the promise of adapting the complete Rosales cycle of novels, Manang Frankie. May you always be present in the future opening nights. I wouldn't mind the tap of the walking cane from across the aisle. Maraming salamat at hanggang sa muli, Manang.
Let us now hear from Mr. Charleston Ong, premier novelist and chairman of Philippine Pen.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Philippine Pen, I'd like to welcome all of you to this tribute to our late national artist and founder, Sionil Jose. On the 40th day of his passing, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to all the participants and speakers, to the Cultural Center of the Philippines for hosting this event, to the Jose family, to my colleagues at the board of the Philippine Pen, whose hard work and dedication has once again made this event possible. As you well know, si Manong Frankie was the founder of the Philippine Pen, and through the decades, he and his support staff, including, of course, the major pillar of his life and work, si Manang Tesi, as well as his assistants at the Solidaridad, including si Cesar Kinagan, have run the pen, decades before any of us got involved in it. But he would always remind us of the importance of an organization like the Pen International. And he says, he always reminded us that times can change. We never know what will happen tomorrow. In fact, we're again in an election season. We do not know how it will turn out. If times are bad, he reminds us that it's important to have a community, an international community, so we do not feel isolated. He would tell us how during martial law, the Pen International was helpful in the release of many writers in prison. Even in recent times, our Writers in Prison Committee remains active and was able to also help in the release of many detainees. So that is a work that we will continue. On a personal note, I've known Frankie Jose for maybe close to 40 years. As many younger writers, I first met him when he invited me to be part of a gathering of young writers from Southeast Asia held here in Manila. And it's one of his legacies. See Frankie, along with his peers from other parts of Southeast Asia, Edwin Tambo of Singapore, the late Mokhtar Lubis, they were keen on creating a network of writers in Southeast Asia. So the friendships that I formed there have continued, and that's also due to his work. I've said this before. See Frankie is a raconteur. He lived to a ripe old age, and he was always a treasured trove of stories about the past, about so many personalities in our history whom he knew personally. And he was also a bit of a nag. Every time we met, he would ask me, "Nasaan yung novela?" It was always a nag to everyone, not just to me. So I just dismissed and said, "I'm working on it." And like niyang sabi, maybe you're just lazy or too comfortable. And I think that was it. I think he was a writer, a person who refused to be comfortable, even though he could well have been. But he wanted to be uncomfortable. He thrived in his discomfort up to the very end. In fact, he made some of us uncomfortable as well. But I think that was just him. He forced you to clarify your own position and to take a stand and to hold your own, as it were. And so that was him. And we will remember him and miss him. Thank you, and enjoy the tribute.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joining us this afternoon is Justice Conchita Carpio Morales, former Ombudsman and Associate Justice of the Supreme Court.
I'm sorry. All right. My former offices are at Padre Faura, but I never had a chance to personally meet Mr. Niapo Sionil Jose. But by a stroke of serendipity, however, a few years back, I personally met him when he and then Senator Angara founded Academiang Filipino, an aggregation of freedom-loving, country-loving Filipinos who believe that they can, in their own way, help meet the challenges that confront our country. Apo Sionil Jose was very proud as an Ilocano, and he was prouder still in knowing that I was an Ilocano, and so he gave me books with dedication in Ilocano, reflective of his pride as a kababayan from way up north. Contrary to the impression that Ilocanos are kuripot, he was very generous. He would host lunches at Diamond's Japanese restaurant, at the Manila Pen, where he celebrated his dearest wife's birthday. And during the meetings that we had at the round table at the third floor of La Solidaridad, he would serve piping hot coffee and ensaimada from Hisons. He was never selfish in sharing his thoughts, in advising me in whatever way he thought I needed advice. He was generous with his words of appreciation, and perhaps he believed in what I had been doing, to the extent that he asked me to collect any documents that would indicate any memorable event during my career, so that he would help me prepare my memoirs. Unfortunately, regrets came later because I never ever thought that he was going to go. Apo Sionil, just again Apo, ti ayat mo kanya. I know you were very fond of me, and the filming was mutual. He invited me to speak at Penn. He invited me to speak before his students in that room in his name at the De La Salle University at Taft Avenue. As I said, the filming was mutual, and that's the reason why there was a time when Jet told me that you were not feeling well. I came up with a what I would think very touching letter to you to keep on. I knew that you would survive, but I never got any reply. So I felt bad, but I knew that sometimes there's a glitch in memory, despite the fact that despite your more than 90 years of living, you had remained smart and very sharp. Thank you, Apo Sionil, for being kind, for being humble, and above all, for having kept the Penn flag flying. We'll miss you. Thank you.
Another former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court is with us this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, Justice Antonio Carpio.
Good afternoon to the family and friends of our dear friend Frankie. I came to know Frankie when he invited me to speak on the West Philippine Sea at the Penn Philippines National Conference in 2016. When Frankie and the late Senator Ed Angara formed Academiang Filipino, Frankie and Ed invited me to be a founding trustee of Academiang Filipino. We all know Frankie as a foremost Filipino novelist. He nurtured young Filipino writers. He founded Penn Philippines. Having personally known Frankie only in the last 7 years of his life, I found him engrossed in gathering preeminent Filipino achievers to harness their talents towards nation building. Nation building, of course, was a recurring theme in Frankie's writings. During our conversations, Frankie said he always wanted to organize something like the Council on Foreign Affairs of the United States. He had been invited to meetings of the US Council of Foreign Affairs in New York. He was impressed how American intellectuals, even those outside of government, influenced the development of US foreign policy. However, Frankie wanted this Filipino group of preeminent achievers to focus on nation building. This Filipino group would advise the Philippine government not only on foreign policy, but also on other areas like science, technology, education, the economy, and the arts. In short, all the areas that should be developed for the building of the Filipino nation. Ed Angara also had the same idea, and both of them co-founded the Academiang Filipino in 2016 with over 100 plus founding members. When Ed Angara died in 2018, Frankie offered his office on the upper floor of his Padre Faura bookstore La Solidaridad as the meeting place of the trustees of the Academiang Filipino. His daughter, Jet, was our first executive director. Jet had returned from the United States, realizing that her father wanted to organize the Academiang Filipino as his last contribution to nation building. Jet sadly had gone to the afterlife barely 2 months ahead of Frankie. We in the Academiang Filipino will continue with the vision of Frankie, our founding chair emeritus. This task will not be easy, as nation building has been the pitfall of our national leaders. But we will carry on to flesh out Frankie's vision, no matter how difficult it may be. And we will ensure that the realization of this vision will also be continued by those who will come after us. Thank you, Frankie, for this vision of nation building. Thank you.
Several of Manong Frankie's esteemed friends and colleagues also have tribute messages. I shall now read 2 of them. The first is from the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Teodoro Locsin Jr. 7 January 2022. Dear Mrs. Jose, the women and men of the Department of Foreign Affairs convey our deepest condolences on the passing of our beloved national artist for literature, F. Sionil Jose. We join your family and our country in grief over such an irreplaceable loss, not only to our literary heritage, but to our country's very soul. Frankie Sionil, as I heard him called by my dad and his comrades in writing, Hans, with his consummate eloquence and stories, dedicated his life to make us remember our past, our struggles, follies, and triumphs as a nation, and the lessons that we ought to have learned in our collective journey. It is by looking at the past, he wrote, that one can draw sustenance and the ability to see clearer how it was and why it is. I can only hope that our nation will always heed his reminder. But it doesn't matter. He did what needed to be done and wrote what needed writing down. A true writer. Generations of Filipinos have immersed themselves in his stories, identified themselves in his characters, saw their lives in his plots, and shaped their views through his musings and opinions. Many generations more will continue to do so and realize that his writings echo our desire to know ourselves better as a people. We share his hope that this will inspire them to love our country more by being better Filipinos. He wished to be remembered as someone who wrote stories and believed in them. It is our prayer that more Filipinos will believe in theirs as they write, literally and figuratively, their own stories. On a very personal note of my own, I grew up in your shop, but I know you and Mr. Sionil never quite saw me as grown up, and I liked it that way. It was the best part of the past we all shared. A small, well-kept, well-stocked place with some of the best in writing, with its unique sense of greater safety and permanence as only a loving couple could impart to it. And even in this pandemic of all times, you and Frankie never failed in giving us what you thought we needed. I will be seeing you. My wife, Louie, and I pray that your family will find comfort during this time, and may Frankie Sionil rest in peace, though I think he'd prefer to keep fighting. Signed, Teodoro L. Locsin, Jr. Another message is from Mr. Edwin Thambu, Poet Laureate of Singapore. His poems were published by Frankie Sionil Jose in Solidarity Journal. Himself a Peranakan of mixed Indian, Chinese parentage, embodying the multiculturalism of Singapore, the Philippines, and Southeast Asia, he considers Frankie Sionil Jose as the first true ASEAN citizen. He wrote, I myself am in my 89th year and have slowed down somewhat since COVID. Frankie was a great man, but more important, his greatness rested on kindness. He was always there when he spoke with me. I learned a great deal from him. Being of mixed parentage myself, I was able to ask him quite a great deal of the new societies that were emerging slowly in Southeast Asia. Frankie was the first true ASEAN citizen. He saw us as region well before most politicians. That is something I have not forgotten. He always thought of ASEAN as a singularity, wanting a commonness that we shared, but at the same time fully aware of our differences, some of which were virtually impossible to reconcile. The sadness of Burma is one example of the kind of problems we face. I feel so sorry that I was not able to see him before he left us. Every time I was in the Philippines, I stayed with him and his wife and family. I still remember the comforts of his home, the mixture of family and privacy. I miss him very much. Although he was not much older than I am, I saw him as a teacher and in a quiet way as a fabulous, quiet Christian. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts about Frankie. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let us hear from Katlin Kalgma, Estonian poet, writer and translator, and board director of PEN International.
Hello and good afternoon, dear friends and family of Frankie. For me, first of all, Frankie was a story. To begin with, Frankie was a story of a man with many, many names. And he, as one of the most important powers behind the Philippines PEN, of course, has the following all over the world. With him, all these people he has been working with throughout the years and the congresses he's been taking part of. So after all, he is the brave man who confronted Susan Sontag during one of the congresses. And it was a true, wonderful coincidence and source of happiness for me that in 2018, when we were preparing the Congress in Manila, I was able to come to Philippines several times and meet Frankie and his wonderful daughter and even more wonderful wife, Teresa. I had hoped that when this pandemic is over, I can return to Philippines and meet these wonderful people again. As I speak this, I'm looking at the photo, absolutely wonderful photo taken at the Manila Congress 2019. One of the photos is me and Frankie together, and the other photo is the photo of the vice presidents who were present at this Congress. And as we all remember, Frankie became a vice president of PEN International at the very same Congress, and I never forget how proud he was and how proud all of us were that this finally happened and took place. I don't know what's going to happen with this bookshop, La Solidaridad. That is institution of culture and of history of not only Philippine literature and Philippine pen, but it is a place of where the literature of world has taken place, and all these meetings that have happened on the second floor of the bookshop. This is truly a place to unite the whole global world. Me coming from a very small place in Estonia, and Frankie there in Philippines, and everything that's between us and everything that's on the other side of the globe, everything was united in this wonderful place. I love mangoes, and I love Philippine mangoes. And Frankie and Teresita never, ever forgot when we went to eat somewhere that I would get my mangoes. Thank you. Thank you, Frankie, for all these wonderful times, conversations, dinners, your books. I have a pile of them, and there is still plenty to read. Thank you for everything.
I shall now read another message, this time from James Fallows, a US National Book Award-winning nonfiction author who was inducted in 2019 to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He was a speechwriter to President Jimmy Carter from 1976 to 1980, when he was just in his late 20s, the youngest presidential speechwriter in US history, and a Southeast Asia-based journalist in the 1980s, during which he met Frankie Sionil Jose and wrote a controversial article about Frankie's view on the Filipinos' alleged damaged culture. He wrote, "The conscience of the nation, remembering the great Frankie Jose. I was heartbroken to see in the papers this weekend that F. Sionil Jose, a writer and civic leader known to millions as Frankie, had died at a hospital in Manila at age 97. I say heartbroken rather than shocked, because through the decades in which I had known Frankie, starting in the 1980s when he was younger than I am now, he had frequently joked that his joyful indulgence in every temptation of life would soon do him in. As I noted in a short piece in 2009 about a visit to him in Manila, every time I've met Jose over the last 20 plus years, he has said, 'Jim, I am getting so much fatter,' with a big laugh, because he loves food, among other pleasures, so much. But Jose has a deadly serious claim to being the conscience of his nation, at legal and physical risk during the Marcos years, and as a sobering voice in the years since then. As I also noted at the time, the main reason I have been interested in the Nobel Prize announcements for literature was to see whether the jurors would finally get around to recognizing F. Sionil Jose for his life's work. Well, that can't happen now. Nobel Prizes go to the living, But all the rest of us can still notice the remarkable works of this man and the power of the life he led. The first of his books I read was The Pretenders, from his famed 5-volume Rosales Saga novels. The book's plot and tensions are specific to the Philippines. But just as Faulkner was not writing only about Mississippi, nor Dickens only about England, Frankie Jose was not writing only about his home islands. His work is rich, broadly human, and beyond borders. A number of Manong Frankie's Filipino writer friends and colleagues also have messages. First, we have multi-awarded writer and poet, former commissioner of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, and former chancellor of UP Mindanao. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ricardo de Ungria.
Good afternoon and happy Valentine's to all. Thank you for inviting me to this tribute to Frankie Sionil Jose. As a high school student in the 60s, fascinated by books and art, I took Saturday walking pilgrimages to Padifara and Mabini streets from our house in Paco, visiting Eriwan, Solidaridad, and Alimar's bookstores to browse on mainly art books and pocket books with interesting covers, before moving on to the various art galleries along Mabini, including the Contemporary Art Gallery of Rodriguez, Philippine Art Gallery in Arquiza, and the Luz Gallery in Harrison, and ending at the AAP office cum gallery at the corner of Hiran and Taft Avenue. Solidaridad was interesting because it had local books and imported books I didn't see anywhere else, and had framed artworks by Asian artists on its walls. Besides, it had a cute young thing manning the cashier's desk, who would turn out to be Frankie's daughter Jet, who, I hope, watched us one night during the Christmas season while our Kingstones band played atop the narrow cantilevered roof of the first floor of the Caltex building in front of it. One morning, a few years later, I was browsing at Solly when I heard raised voices some 2 feet behind me. I don't remember now what the argument was about, but when I turned to look, I saw a balding, portly man pointing at the door and yelling at a white man to get out because he had been saying things about the bookstore and Filipinos that he shouldn't be saying because he did not know any better. When the foreigner left, grumbling, the balding man was still muttering to himself as he patted the books on the display table as though to calm them down before going through a narrow door at the back and climbing up to the second floor. Man's got balls, I thought, and that must be the owner. I made it a point to ask the cashier who owned the bookstore. I don't recall now who introduced me to Frankie. It was before I even became a member of PEN Philippines. Maybe it was Godofredo Bursebunao, who I saw there, or Federico Lixes Pino, who I usually saw there and was always trying to sell me any of his books that he fished out of the small bag he carried with him. Or probably Cirilo Bautista, who was my teacher at La Salle. The bookshop was a special place for me because it was there where I saw and heard famous writers speak, like Nick Joaquin, Greg Brillantes, Wally Soyinka, Mario Vargas Llosa, Gunter Grass, and Norman Mailer with his tall, pretty wife, among many others. Eventually, I was able to win a few prizes in the Palanca contests and to publish a few books that he must have read, such that whenever he chanced upon me in the bookstore, he would talk to me. Soon, we would continue the conversation in the second floor of the store that functioned as the business office, and later, even at the third floor, that had a small gallery with a round table and chairs and a small room by the stairs that had a shelf of books, a sofa, a toilet, and a wide desk where he worked. Beside it, curtained off from view, was a nice cushioned and pillowed nook, big enough for him to lie down for some rest or shut-eye. Occasionally, he would invite me to merienda at Jazz Cafe nearby, where he would tell more stories about himself and other writers. Sometimes he'd give me a book from his shelves upstairs, or else have me choose one from the books in the shop. I appreciated those gestures of kindness from him, knowing he was an Ilocano. He was always writing, and when asked about it, he would point proudly at a folder on his desk. After I moved to Davao, I always found time to visit and see what new stocks the bookstore had. His shop assistant, Cesar Kinagan, would see me and tell Frankie I was around, and Frankie would have me come up for coffee and talk. And there were many times he took me to dinner in many places in Ermita with his wife Tess, and it would be even more a livelier threesome with Tess adding footnotes to Frankie's stories. What did we talk about? A lot of things. Writing, writers here and abroad, politics, issues of the day, his life and mine, his travels, and much more. I'm surprised, on hindsight, how we were able to talk for hours. I didn't indulge in small talk, knowing that my tongue was often quick to flash its horns and slash away, and neither did he. I preferred to listen to others and observe how they thought. I was more ears than mouth. But I guess we both provoked and teased out thoughts from each other. Not deep thoughts, really, but natural thoughts muscled out of strong personalities of different ages, alive at the same period of time. There wasn't much to disagree about in terms of ideas on social justice, elitist politics, coloniality of being, artistic relevance, and the like. And there'd be episodes of laughter from time to time. It was simply that he had more personal experiences with the reality of those things, and I learned much about those things coming from deep in his bones. I appreciated his rage and his impatience for change, seeing that they could also be mine. Whenever I read any column or article of his that seethes, I know that the wrong he messes with again in order to try straightening things out again has impinged on him again, because despite the passage of time and the changes in national leadership, nothing has sunk in and moved us out of the deep pit we are sinking in clamorously, merrily, heedlessly. He'd say what was in his mind on anything and anybody, and damn the torpedoes and social media. And what was in his mind was most often and defiantly not the same as most everybody else's, which is what I appreciated in him and what I already miss. On the eve of his death, perhaps sensing something, Frankie, who wrote all his life, wrote to his heart, wishing it to stay with him so he can write another day. Frankie, thank you for the friendship and generosity of spirit all those years. Without you, the bookshop will be different and the same, because I know you'll just be spread all over it. Tess, hugs to you, Tess. I miss you. Stay strong. Take it easy now. Let the kids run the store. the kids are all right. See ya. Thank you.
Let us now listen to the message of multi-awarded fictionist and writer and former Vice President for Public Affairs of UP Diliman, Mr. Jose Butch Dalisay.
As I wrote about in my column for The Star, Frankie, Sionil, Jose, and I did not have the coziest of relationships. It was relatively late in both our lives that we became good friends, after realizing and accepting that we were interested in many of the same things. That included writing about Philippine social reality, nurturing young writers, and promoting the role of culture and literature in our national life. We worked together on the board of the Academiang Filipino to harness many of our best minds in the arts, the sciences, and the professions to move this nation forward. This gave me an opportunity to know him up close. Like many other writers, I disagreed with and was confounded by some of his politics, and he knew it, but I decided to focus on our points of agreement. Ultimately, we can be thankful to FSJ for raising the profile of the Filipino writer and of Philippine literature on the global stage through his prodigious and well-circulated work. For many, his novels, aside from those of Rizal, have been their only introduction to our society and predicaments. That in itself is high achievement enough. He challenged us to write more novels of weight and substance, and to persevere to the very end. He even wrote his last column on what turned out to be his deathbed. It was the way to live and the way to go. Salamat, Manong.
Joining us this afternoon is Ms. Francesca Kit Kwe, an award-winning young fictionist and assistant professor at the MA in Creative Writing program of the UP Department of English and Comparative Literature.
Good afternoon. My name is Kit, and I've known Manong Frankie and his wife, Manong Tessie, for 17 years, from when I was a student, a journalism student at the University of Santo Tomas, and he was one of the resident writers at the Creative Writing Center there. So at the beginning of that relationship, I was a college student and young writer. And then I entered academia, I got married, I had a family, and I am still now a semi-young writer. And throughout those years, Manong Frankie and his family were my friends until they became family to me and my husband, Chris. I say family because our relationship was not just anchored on the profession of writing and the ties in the writing community, but because in many personal events, like my wedding, the birth of my children, the illness that befell my father-in-law, Jose Lacaba, and many others, the Joses were there physically and emotionally. I think many young writers have described how generous Manong Frankie was, and this is something that I really witnessed. He always had a very keen interest in reading the works of young writers, inviting them to the bookshop, getting to know them over a meal or several meals, or taking them to his hometown of Rosales in Pangasinan in a sort of retracing of his journey from being the son of a teacher to national artist. More than anyone, he always challenged me to write. As if to him, you're not really a writer if you're not writing. And this was something he always exercised up to the end because, he still had prodigious output. It didn't matter what you would be writing about. What he was after was that you were doing it. And if you weren't, he would find fault in that. And so he was that, a challenger in everything, even in debates about political views. And he always had to rise to the challenge, not making him change his mind, because we all know how stubborn he was, but to present sound, dignified, and intelligent arguments and responses. Actually, you'll know that you're able to do that when you see him take a pause. And that's a sign that he's considering what you said. I've always wondered why he took such an interest in my writing. There was certainly no incentive for him to do so. But for some reason, that's unfathomable to me. He believed in what I could do. And that was a gift, for someone to believe in your potential when you are yourself many times unconvinced. Throughout the years, as I grew up, I also grew in terms of how I understood and how I analyze the world in which Manong Frankie and I exist. The world where we struggle for what I believe all writers and artists should push towards, and that's social justice and genuine change. Because now I'm a unionist teacher at the University of the Philippines, and I'm acutely aware of how my ideologies starkly contrast with that of Manong Frankie. But all the time we spent together, I will always learn from those times. I take them with me to remind me for always of how important it is that writers be on the right side of history, of how we should not be confined to an ivory tower, but instead stand arm in arm with peasants and the marginalized, precisely the lineage that Manong Frankie was aware that he was from. So to end, I think the way that I would like to honor my memories of Manong Frankie is through being resolute to the values that I stand for: social justice, militancy, and the moral and ethical responsibility of writers to actively participate in the struggle for national liberation. I can imagine what he would say to that, were he here. But what's important, I think, is commitment to one's principles, and he would definitely respect that. Manong Frankie, Godspeed to you and Ate Jet. And I knew and I felt how much you loved me and Chris. My love to the Jose family, Kuya Tonet, and especially Manang Tessie, and with everything that is happening around us, I believe we can craft a better future. I'm sure of it, and I'll be there with you when it comes. Thank you to the team of the CCP and the Philippine Pen for your efforts in putting this program together. Our collective unity, or our collective efforts to unify writers and artists, such as what the Pen is aiming to do for incarcerated and persecuted writers, will be very much needed in the days to come. Thank you.
Up next is the president of the Book Development Association of the Philippines and publisher of Emil Flores Publishing Incorporated. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Andrea Pasion Flores.
Good day, everybody. In college, before I met Frankie Sionil Jose, I gave my husband, when I was still seeing him, all of Manong Frankie's Rosales novels because they were both from Pangasinan. I thought then, a young girl in college, that I understood his novels. Years later, I would finally meet Manong Frankie, and we've had many conversations together. Manong would ask unanswerable questions like, do you know why we're poor? Or the feet of the poor are wide like this. And he would spread his hands, stubby fingers and all, and he would ask, do you know why? I had answers in my head I thought would probably be wrong. And so, but I'd ask why, and he'd say, read my books. But I've read them, I thought. Instead of like being bothered to look for his books again, I would just buy all his books all over again. When I was at the National Book Development Board, we had a literary tour that stopped at his bookshop. I think he loved it when students surround him. So after, he sent me a note in his little stationery, and among other things, he said, "Mabuhay ka." After my stint at the NBDB, he asked me, "Did you make enemies?" And I said, "A few." He said, "Good." When I was at my former job in another publishing company, I had the ambition of asking him for the Rosales novels to publish. We were going to come out with a classics edition, and I thought that those novels certainly fit. He declined by asking me if I've eaten at Hizon's, that restaurant where Dolphy frequented. So I said I hadn't. So he and Ma'am Tessie took me there, and he promised he would send his next novel my way. But he said, remember, I'm 92 years old, as if telling me to surmise what I would. So we took a picture, me, Manang Tessie, and Manong Frankie, and I sat between them, and I looked like a young girl in the photo, no, but I'm most certainly middle-aged. I had handed him a copy of the Penguin Random House edition of Nick Joaquin's stories, which I told him my agent did, which he knew, of course, but he was indulgent of my little accomplishments. But he said, I miss him, referring to Nick Joaquin. And he said he's the only one I could have intelligent conversations with. But he was, and then he said something, and I said, oh. So I asked him, and what do you think of? And then I asked about another national artist. And he said, he's okay, but he's quite dull. And I laughed, and I thought it was true, knowing I would never be able to say what he said out loud. Nor could many people, because making enemies is a frightful and tiring business. After one of those book launches in Makati, when I sat next to him and Ma'am Tessie as they waited for their vehicle, I asked him how he was, and he said, I'm an old man. And I said, a sharp one still. And he said, I have all sorts of aches. I lived through X. I don't remember how many he mentioned. He said, I lived through so many presidents. I'm 94, And as they drove off, I thought how 94 was such a grand number. I would receive an invitation to his 95th birthday at the CCP. But there was a storm or the usual catastrophic event or incident in the Philippines that canceled it. I forgot what now, but I don't think people younger than him are allowed to forget anything. I remember him saying something like that to Ma'am Tessie about some incident or a person that had to come up in conversation. And when he was told, I forgot or I forget who, and then he said, how can you forget when you're younger than me? Most people would be younger than him, but we all forget. On one other occasion, I told Manong once that my husband is from Pangasinan, and I had given him his books, Manong Frankie's books, when we were still dating. And he said, every year I try to go back there. We don't have a house there or people to visit. I just go. Why? I asked. It's home, he said. Thank you, Manong Frankie, for the friendship. Thank you, Manang Tessie, for sharing him with us. Thank you to the Joseph family for sharing your wonderful father with the nation. Thank you.
Also here to share his message is writer, historian, lawyer, and author of Under the Stacks, A Socio-Cultural Political History of the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sol Hofilenya. Sir, we would, if it's possible, to turn your camera a bit down, sir, so we can see. Yes, so thank you very much, sir.
Sionil Jose was an incomparable magister of the written word. One day, and I remember this as if it were only yesterday. Sionil Jose told me that oftentimes he would look himself in the mirror and chastise himself for being ignorant of a lot of things. The reason he said that was because he didn't know how to read Hungarian. He cannot speak Swahili. He cannot read a novel written in the ancient Mongolian alphabet. For him, all knowledge is useful. The acquisition of knowledge, for Sionil Jose, is an end by itself. He was always reading in order to improve his mind. And he was blessed. Or maybe he was cursed by hypergraphia, which is a word used to describe the insatiable need to write one's thoughts in words on paper. He was always striving up to the end of his days to perfect his craft. I have a lot of stories to tell about Sionil Jose, but they are too many and they are too numerous. Because after all, I was his lawyer. Let me just say that with the death of Sionil Jose, our nation will no longer be the same, because we have lost a truly great Filipino. Thank you.
We now move on to the book launch portion of this tribute. Writing the Nation is a non-fiction book that collects Frankie Sionil Jose's most important essays on Philippine literature, politics, and culture. The book is edited by Alejandro D. Padilla, and the cover has the painting Heroes of the Past by national artist for visual arts Benedicto Bencab Cabrera. Collected Short Stories gathers in one solid volume all of the important short fiction written by Sionil Jose throughout his long and very prolific writing career. It carries his first published short story, The Man Who Lied, published in the February 1946 issue of a Philippine American magazine, edited by Salvador P. Lopez and published by Benjamin Salvoza. Collected Short Stories is edited by Leonara R. Dimagiba. Cover photography is by Antonio Jose, and graphic design is by Nico Jose. Promdi, an Ilocano autobiography, is the much-awaited autobiography of Frankie Sionil Jose. It is edited by Leonara Dimagiba. The cover photograph shows the water tank, a landmark in Frankie's hometown of Rosales, Pangasinan. He had always bragged that he had climbed the tank when he was a kid. Photograph is by Antonio Jose, and the book's graphic design is by Nico Jose. In all three books, there appears the bust of Frankie Sionil Jose by the country's best sculptress, Julie Luch. All three books are published by Solidaridad Publishing, which is now accepting advanced orders. Call Solidaridad Bookshop at 8254-1058 or visit the Solidaridad Bookshop Facebook page. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let us listen to the response of the Jose family. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Alex Jose, son of Manong Frankie.
Good afternoon. My mother, brothers, and sister and I would like to express our deepest gratitude to the Cultural Center of the Philippines and Philippine Pen for the memorial for our father. Everyone has been so gracious and kind in expressing their condolences to us. Our father's prolific career has a substantial part to do with our mother, who worked feverishly in running the bookshop, the gallery, and our household. He afforded our father the time to travel, research, and write. While supporting my father, our mother was able to raise 7 children and adopt Philippine Pen as their 8th child. Through the years, writers, poets, and artists would flock to the 3rd floor of the bookshop to exchange ideas and learn from others on how to better their craft around the round table. If walls only had ears. Our father taught us many things, and one of the things that he always told us was to remember our history and to sharpen our memories so we can impart our knowledge to the next generation. I would like to read a poem he wrote that has never been published. Tongue. It's the tongue that rules the lithy world. It is that speaks and is obeyed from pole to pole. Yet there is a tongue that can't even squeak, bound by shackles, benumbed and free. Tongues that want to speak but only moan. And its words are looks, prayers, and tears. There is a tongue that promises but can't do. The demagogue that gestures before a foolish crowd and makes them believe flatterers' words. There is the tongue of the sage, scarred into wisdom, whose advice is gold. The tongue that can't be stilled like a Grecian lioness, who cuts her tongue so it can't betray. My father wrote this poem when he was 20 years old. With confidence, Philippine Pen will continue to work in promoting the craft of creative writing with the pillars of independence, inclusiveness, and a deep sense of history and remembrance. Knowing my father, nothing would make him happier than to see current and future generations remember their history, and for those lost to awaken from their wandering and idle slumber. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Manang Tessie. And thank you to the Jose family. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today, the 40th day since the passing of Manong Frankie. We miss him, our national artist for literature and founder of Philippine Pen. For all that you've done for country and literature, and for the support that you have extended to all who look up to you. Duro-duro gid nga salamat, Manong Frankie. Thank you.